in New York City. White was working with a CIA officer named Sidney Gottlieb. Gottlieb was chief of the Technical Services Division at the time, and he had access to a lot of LSD. CIA scientists had decided was the drug that they were going to focus on now. Pot wasn't considered quite potent enough to do the things that they wanted to do. White conscripted a couple of federal narcotic agents to help him, a couple of informants, narcotic agent informants to help him, and went into the streets of New York and got a softcore pornographer named Gil White to help him as well. Apparently White had his own sexual perversions, which have been written about. He was into S&M, so he had a couple of qualifications for the job, which went beyond just being a federal agent who could perform these functions. He actually was good at acting out the sorts of things that went on in the drug underworld. In 1953, the program was formalized, and it was called Midnight Climax. And White had a safe house in New York City, which the CIA outfitted with a two-way mirror, with microphones and recording devices, so that White and the CIA scientists could actually film people who had been surreptitiously dosed with LSD. The program expanded beyond merely LSD. And what they found out was that the safe houses themselves were probably the most valuable aspect of this program. Prostitutes that were in their employ that would bring people to these apartments, and they could actually record them while they were doing drugs. In 1960, the CIA opened another safe house in New York City. And I talked to the people who were running this safe house. And one of the narcotic agents said to me that they felt that the CIA was actually using this safe house when dignitaries were visiting the UN or politicians were coming to New York City to talk to the mayor or state or even federal officials, that they were using filming them and potentially using the films for purposes of political blackmail.
Another CIA-funded Harvard graduate was Dr. Martin T. Orne, whose expertise in hypnotism, psychiatry, and psychology was a valuable asset to national security. A close friend of Dr. George Estabrooks, Orne's work in hypnoprogramming at Cornell in the 1960s was funded by the Human Ecology Fund and the Scientific Engineering Institute, both of which received funding from the CIA. To provide cover for operations like Midnight Climax, the CIA's MKUltra psychiatrists formed the False Memory Syndrome Foundation to obscure the facts of these covert experiments, creating confusion enough to deny acts of pedophilia, cult abuse, and other inconvenient truths of CIA activities. The False Memory Syndrome Foundation's board was a who's who of MKUltra. There, Dr. Orne was joined by another CIA MKUltra psychiatrist, Dr. Jolyon West, who was the protege of Dr. Ewan Cameron. Like his esteemed MKUltra colleagues, West was infamous for his hypnoprogramming abilities, using words to make patients believe that their memories of abuse were just figments of their imaginations.
The people who started the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, Pamela and Peter Fried, stated to public that Peter had been falsely accused of incest by his daughter, whose name is Pamela. She's now the editor, has been for quite a few years, the editor of the Journal of Trauma and Dissociation, to which I've contributed numerous papers, and it's really the main journal for the study of multiple personality, which was created on purpose in the Manchurian candidate programs under MKUltra, Artichoke, Bluebird. Contractors on that included Jolly West and Martin Orne, and they're on the board of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, which says that all these cases of multiple personality are created by the therapist, and all the memories are false memories.
I cannot dismiss what our intelligence agencies have been able to do by way of mind programming in different forms of research, Project Bluebird, MK Ultra, and so on and so forth. Well, let me just say it this way. Jules Romaine, testifying on behalf of the CIA to Congress, said, and this paraphrase is going to be so close to word for word, it's unbelievable, "We now know that we can take a man and, given sufficient time, educate him to kill his mother and father and eat them in a stew."
How will power gravitate into the hands of those who control information? Through the internet, through wireless networks, through smart grids, smart devices, and smart meters, to monitor and control the personal behavior of every citizen in the grid. How has the role of harnessing the minds of human resources shaped the 20th and now the 21st centuries? This single pattern emerges from all the seeming chaos. The role of science, as juxtaposed to the mind, has not been used to help individuals. Rather, at every turn, at every discovery's emergence, knowledge is being used to restrain individuals. Learned helplessness is just one example.
And so in the 1970s, they discovered through these experiments with dogs that if you put a dog, or two groups of dogs in a situation, one group of dog, they had control over when they were being shocked. They could use their nose and hit a panel and stop the shock. And another group of dogs, they had the equal amount of shocks, but they no matter what they did, they couldn't control the stoppage of shocks. They discovered this phenomenon called learned helplessness, and that the dogs that who had no control over stopping their shocks, they would become passive and depressed, and that when you put them in another task where all the dogs actually had control over stopping their shock by kind of jumping over this short barrier, the dogs that had learned helplessness, in other words, the dogs in the previous experiment who had learned that there was nothing that they can do to stop their pain, they did not bother trying. National elections is not equal to democracy. Democracy means you really have some power over things that affect your life, okay? But when Americans think that their democracy equals national elections, and they go and they have senseless wars and corporate control with a Republican in office like George W., and they think, well, we're going to stop these senseless wars and corporate control, and we're going to go and vote for Obama, this Democrat, and they get, what do they get? Senseless wars and corporate control. And so there's a kind of learned helplessness that sinks in there.
How are the attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, and values of a society transformed such that the needs of the individual are always in conflict with the demands of the group? The early 20th century trend of conspicuous consumption, or the trading of that which is valuable and sensible for that which is superficial and frivolous, swept over America and other countries around the world, with the help of a few minds who were focused on changing our lives before we were even born. Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, is well known as the father of modern propaganda and public relations, and for his application of psychological techniques to the field of advertising.
People have a herd instinct. They tend to move in groups. They make conclusions based on emotion and feelings and desires.
Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, the archetypal psychiatrist, openly bragged that there was a ruling elite that had taken control of society and that could basically program people like machines to walk off the edge of a cliff if ordered to do so. He was the guy that said, don't call yourself the Department of War, call yourself the Department of Defense. And he wrote book after book, like the book Propaganda in 1922, bragging about how we were all dumb animals and how the public mind was in his hand. They couldn't sell pork bellies. They were seen as junk meat, only used as flavoring in soups. They came out and said, no breakfast is complete without eggs and bacon, and showed a woman, on the newsreel sitting there cooking it. And he said, look, I can make these people do anything I want. And so he is really the archetypal father of brainwashing and propaganda right as the age of television began. And they took his sciences and just wrecked this country.
Some of his most famous clients included Procter & Gamble, General Motors, General Electric, the United Fruit Company, Westinghouse Electric, Time Magazine, NBC, and CBS.
He looked at what Uncle Freud had plumbed out, how the unconscious worked, and devised in his own mind the idea that you could cause people to do what you wanted them to do because they chose to do it. Indeed, in his work, Propaganda, he makes it clear that it is the duty of the intellectual elite to orchestrate the beliefs and behaviors of the public in order to have a cohesive society.
They got together and said, well, you know, people are too darn dumb. We have to program them mentally to do what they're supposed to do. Political science is largely based today on Bernays' work.
In 1917, Bernays served on the Committee for Public Information, otherwise known as the Creel Committee, which set out to change public opinion in favor of the United States' involvement in World War I. At the request of Woodrow Wilson, Bernays personally attended the Paris Peace Conference of 1919, the same year that he would found the first public relations firm in the United States.
Advancing some of this work, of course, he was commissioned by Woodrow Wilson and to assist in selling the idea of World War I, that it was about spreading democracy throughout Europe. He is, for all intent and purposes, the father of what we call today neuromarketing.
It has been widely reported that Joseph Goebbels had employed Bernays' Crystallizing Public Opinion, the first book written on the emerging field of public relations, while formulating his own propaganda campaigns for Nazi Germany.
Secure your copy today at Infowars.com.
And we're back talking to the makers of this film as we premiere it tonight, State of Mind. I wanted to ask a couple of you guys, Austin Green and Chris Emery, how does media and advertising play in to the conditioning, the brainwashing? Because I find that to be the more subtle and more pervasive. I mean, you watch any show, dads are bad, families are bad, government's God, government's perfect, gun owners are evil. I mean, it's really over the top. And they call that kind of just the low-level propaganda.
Well, my experience working in front of the camera for 18 years, I was in print, parts in movies, commercials. I saw the subtleties, whether it be on a sexual overtone, the colors, the basic senses, whether it be smell, sight, whatever the case may be. And it got to the point where I just said, wow, this is way too much. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. You are actually conditioned from, like Richard said, from the days you're in diapers. Some of the parents just plop you in front of the TV because that's the babysitter. That is, like you had mentioned earlier in one of the trailers, Alex, like sitting in the front of a barrel of a gun. You really have to watch that because your mind, not only because of the brainwaves that are controlled, but of the pictures, the images, and telling the child, hey, this is normal, this is good, that is not good. And so as a movie maker, I says, I'm getting behind the camera and I want to try something different. I want to get the truth out there. We turn this thing completely around as a film crew, 180 degrees. And the mind control, the deception, just whether it be subtle or overt and so forth, it's unbelievable. We really have to take control of that.
I mean, this is the interface that the globalists or the elites use to interface with the rest of the population to further their agenda. And so the media and the advertising is their tool for controlling the masses. It's the only way they can interact with all of us at a single time because there's just too many of us.
That's a great point. And through this, you can see what their worldview is, what their end game is, and what they think of us. And it's a nightmarish thing they're pushing.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you look at what's going on right now. I mean, children nowadays, are basically they never grow up. I mean, that's
well,
really
they're brain
what's
damaged. They're admitting
yeah.
that television lowers IQ, it dumbs them down. They don't know how to communicate. They are these one-dimensional spectators.
They have no sense of self-reliance because all the shows on TV basically show you that to be funny and cool, basically you shouldn't learn anything. You shouldn't